access to the hosted environment. And in that hosted environment, you'll be able to log in and you'll see a set of menus that are very specific to what you have. And this is our demo environment, so I've got a lot more functionality turned on than what you would be looking at typically. But you'll see sales menu is a very common menu that you'll utilize, as well as the cart fueling menu. Those will be the two primary menus that you'll be utilizing in the system. And so for today's discussions, I want to run through the most common account setup, where we'll add customers, what type of attributes to set up for them that are the most commonly used or important ones. And then we'll continue to talk about, transcend that down to the card level and the other details. So as you first log in, you'll see a menu tree on the left. That menu tree, when you click on it, will open a body here that gives us the details of what information you can access for the modules. And so as we're getting familiar with the home page and the screens, you'll see some common options up here for navigating between screens. If you have any screens minimized or hidden behind other screens, you can get to them from there, as well as customization of user preferences. And I'll show you this just briefly, where you can change passwords. A lot of time we will set a default password for you just to be able to get you in the system. But if you want to make it something that you can remember more clearly, then you can go in and just click your name at the top and change the password from there. And then you'll be prompted for a screen for old password, new password. And so really where I want to focus our time is on the setup of customers, cards, vehicles, and their account settings. So from the sales menu, the customers tab, we'll be able to pull up a list of all that you have. And as we're bringing data from auto fueling forward, know that we're maximizing as much converted data that we can cleanly extract as possible. We're around 95% of the usable information is converted. There's a couple of things that need some adjustments on post-conversion cleanup that's traditionally related around taxes or related to pricing, just because there's some key within our software for that. It's a different structure than what auto fueling did. It doesn't quite convert perfectly, but it converts very close, or it's a minor modification. So we'll see more of those details in our next session. So from a customer standpoint, we can bring open the screen for the customers. We're going to start out, and this is with many of the screens you'll see in the software, we're going to start with a grid of the available data. So in this case, because customers, we're going to see a list of customers that we can sort and filter and adjust this report grid. So it serves two key purposes. One, for it becomes a report of the system, but secondary to that, so the drill down into the detailed transaction. So if you're searching for a customer, and let's say I've got a customer report that has a lot of my card block examples on it, I'm going to utilize them. You can do this coming on the grids very simply to search all of the fields at the top, or you can be very specific and you can filter by column, or you can even drag and drop. If I just wanted to see a certain city of customers, I can drag that up here as well. And you'll notice it starts auto filtering that list. Anywhere on these reporting grids, you can apply the filters, you can hide columns, you can show additional options. You can reorder the columns, and then you can save that as a custom tab, or you can save it as your default. So you can see here, I start with the full customer list, or customers tab here. I've got one that's pre-filtered that had been saved previously for my Indiana. any of these grids, export it out to Excel, PDF, text, or CSV, just to make it, if you want to drill into that information more detailed.
Excuse me, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm having trouble hearing you. You're garbled. Is there a problem on my end, or am I the only one?
No, same here.
Same. Okay. Is that any better?
Yes.
Seems to be.
Okay. So as I continue to work through, I can repeat some of that information about the customer grids if that'll be helpful for you.
I think I got it. It was garbled.
Yeah. Before I get into anything more complex, you want to make sure you hear it clearly.
Yeah, it seems fine now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I had on speakerphone earlier, but I'll try with the handset here and see if that sounds like that's better for us. So we'll continue on. So as we're filtering out this list of customers, changing, saving those filters, we can turn around and open any one of these records. And from here, you're going to get to a single point of reference screen for that customer. And so we put a lot of related information about the customer all in one place or readily accessible from that same home customer screen. So this is going to lay out into a couple of tabs, and those tabs are related to, we'll touch base on the critical tabs of information that you'll be utilizing. But the first tab is customer default contact information, phone number, email address, etc. I mean, it's pretty common information to a solution, but it's that where you start with. So in addition to that, I'll show a couple of features that will benefit for you. So when you're searching addresses, putting in new customers, or actually using a Google database to look up the closest address to your IP address. And so from there, I can actually filter in, and it'll default in, address, city, state, zip, and time zone if that's so all of that information, makes it very easy to find and pick out customer accounts. And then in addition to that, we can maintain additional contact information. So if you have any details where you want to track more about your customer, almost to the point of stalking, you can have, social media accounts linked to this. You can also link in websites, alternative phones, fax, or emails, in addition to a primary account. And this contact here is our default contact. We also have the ability to maintain additional contacts for a company. And auto fueling had two fields. One was like a primary account information, and another one for emailing extra accounting documents. So they had two of them, but they weren't quite as defined as what we have here for contacts, where you can actually track, additional names and administration, and determine how they want to receive their documents. So in this example of Jim Smith, who is a contact at this company, we can have specific email address, phone number, cell phone information, all the way down to how do they want to get emailed of what documents. So if they want the statement, invoice from Card Fueling, or if they want any notifications or invoices or any payment details, you can select multiple email distribution methods to set up on there. The most common ones that are emailed, at least in the auto fueling system, is that the Card Fueling billing cycle, which we call the CF invoice or Card Fueling invoice. And then you may see some customers get emails of statements separately, or sometimes that can be embedded directly into the invoice, or payment notifications, or like drafting of bank accounts would be other common notices. And as we continue to look at some of the key information here, knowing that you can have additional contacts, you can also control if they have the ability to log in through a web portal, and that's an available add-on to the solution. As you move towards an Adopt I21, if that's something that your customers would have need of, you can actually control and enable portal access directly by each customer's contact and have multiple contacts in the system. And that does give them access to live data. From here, some of the other tabs, I've got a lot of information turned on for our full demo environment, but there are some specific tabs that you would use very regularly, one of them being the Activities tab. You can use this for creating internal comments and notes, and those notes could be related to collections or customer account or corrections or anything you want to make note of on account and see the history of. So from here you can see that we had a past due collections call made where they were overdue, and it just gives you more visibility from a customer account maintenance standpoint to be able to track and put those in. You can also upload attachments. So in the case of attachments, that gives you the option to be able to see any PDFs, JPEGs, or actually you can upload even more than that. Some of them that could be previewed through a web page or images or PDFs. But then that'll give you access if you had credit agreements with customers, if you had any specific documents that you wanted to have on file for an account, you can electronically scan them and upload them into the system just by hitting this Add Item button. And you'd be able to drag files or browse out and pull them from a file. The next tab here is our Audit Log tab, and this gives us the ability to see any time information was changed. So if we look here, we can actually see that this particular customer was enabled for portal admin on September 19th by Michael. Or we can actually see if there's any differences changed on any of the fields, the before and after. Some of these were blank on the before. So this Audit Log, Attachments, and Activities, these are tabs that are part of our framework, and you'll see them throughout the system. Just about every screen has these three tabs available. So once we've set up the basic information for a customer and created a new customer account with name, address, information, and any additional contacts we want to track, there is a customer tab. And this customer tab is where we're going to control some additional very specific AR information. And again, there's quite a few tabs here and quite a few fields, but I'm going to really hone this into the ones that are most pertinent. So in that regard, if there was any default information, you obviously don't have to fill in every field, but there are some fields that are going to be required. And so specifically on this first tab here, the terms is a required field, and that's so that when we're setting up accounts, we know when to calculate their due dates. You can also control multiple ship to, bill to locations, which may apply for other petroleum business opportunity lines of business, but is typically not required for card lock. So those bill to, ship to information will default to the primary customer information. On the next tab here, we have miscellaneous information, and this is where you'll get details on credit. So if they've got a credit limit, any controls there, and we can also control how they get service charged and what their statement format is going to look like. So those are probably the three other key fields here: the credit limit, statement format, and service charge code. Service charge code can be left blank if you do not want to charge somebody service charges, if you want them to be exempt. One other tab I'm going to take you to on the customer screen is the taxing tab. And this is specific to controlling your tax exemptions. So just like in auto fueling where you can set up tax exemptions, and we are converting all of this information in that I'm showing you from your existing setup. So this is typically not something that needs to be adjusted, but it's something that if you're adding a new account, you'd want to know where to put it. So from here on the customer taxing tab, we can control exemptions. And when we're setting up exemptions, these are very specific to what types of products or what types of taxes. And as we look across these, you'll notice some of these are optional. So we can set somebody up as federal excise tax exempt on just gasoline products, gas and diesel, and we can really control that based on which options are in the first couple of columns. So in the first exemption example, we're saying for this dyed diesel product, they're exempt for sales tax, but only in New Mexico. So you could control exemptions at a state level. So I know, I believe we've got Pennsylvania customers and Tennessee customers. We got a couple of marketers in on this training that are going through the process together. But you could be honing it into just very specific taxations there. A tax class is a type of tax, so that's usually like a federal excise tax, state excise tax, sales tax would be different types of taxes. And then if you didn't want to allow exemptions out of state, because you may not be eligible for filing for a refund of those taxes outside of your typical state. And then you can see this red asterisk here, that becomes a required field on the start date of that exemption. And if you require your customers to renew their exemptions and send you new exemption certificates every year, you could actually put in an end date that would make those exemptions stop after a certain date or time. Any questions on the general customer fields that have shown so far?
Can you can you set it so that it only exempts taxes when they purchase at certain locations?
Are you thinking about captive sites, or are you thinking about
Network
not
sites.
wanting to exempt retail sites or outside of your locals?
Yeah, retail sites. I want to not exempt retail sites.
There is an option at the site level to disallow exemptions on retail sites, but then allow them at the network or at your local sites as long as they match the state requirements.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the case of retail, there's too many random sites occurring to be able to track them. So we have a default setting for, you can exclude all retail sites from exemptions or just and selectively override that as needed.
Okay.
Okay. So from here, and just related to the layout of the screens and the amount of information we had to present, we actually we added a link here for additional information for card fueling. And that's where it will take you to the next screen and show information about card setup and other maintenance related to that account, to the card lock processing. So I'm going to maximize this screen. And so one of the first things that you'll see on this screen is we can tell there's a couple more tabs here of information. And we always default to cards. That seems to be the most common place to start, is that a customer is calling you and they're on the phone and they want to know they lost a PIN. Couldn't remember what it was. So as you're looking up an account, being able to link to and set up any of this information here for a PIN number at a quick glimpse, or see when a card was issued versus when it was last used, or if they're using departments, be able to see and set any of these fields on the fly. So actually this grid is entirely editable. So if you wanted to add in additional card number. You can add it on the fly here. And we are finishing up development on importing cards from the network again. That'll make it so you'll be able to do that after the controller's fully sunset. So as I'm just adding a test card here, you have some additional optional fields you can maintain, such as card type. If you're looking and wanted to actually know what types of card stock was available, that has diminished in value of tracking since the network is consolidated to a single card type. And then the system will automatically update last date used as transactions get processed through. And issue date on new ones will default to today. Additional information here for a good thing to know and keep track of is card locked versus active. So card locked is a temporary lock, typically done for a credit hold type situation where you would want to lock the cards and make sure that if we send that information that we can turn around and unlock them. Card active is probably the more likely field you'll be using, and that's when a card is lost, canceled, or being reissued, and you want to completely deactivate that card for any potential use on the network, whereas the card locked is that temporary usage. And then you can also track additional comments on if the card was lost or any other details. So we look at some of these other tabs. One thing to note between auto fueling and i21 is when you're trying to assign a department to a card, it's going to be a drop-down list. In auto fueling, that was a free data entry field. And so during a conversion, we're adding all these departments on the fly to this list. But I've seen in the past where there was typos on that field because maybe it was abbreviated differently or uniquely depending on the card. So that would be one area of potential cleanup. And also, as I'm talking about in general the migration from auto fueling to i21, one of the areas to really focus on is, as we're learning the system and testing and playing around with it, we don't want to spend a lot of time cleaning up information in auto fueling unless it's corrupt data that Paul or Craig or myself will reach out to you and ask you to correct. But what we found, and of course we learned these lessons the hard way, was that some customers were going back and changing data and revamping all their terms codes and revamping all of their service charge setup. And what we found was, due to the validations during data conversion, that made it harder for us to reconvert at go live without errors. And the new platform is much easier to mass update information. So if we needed to make something consistent or clean up information, we would be able to do that much easier after you go to the new system. So that's something to consider, that if you've got inactive cards and you're trying to you want to delete them out of auto fueling, I would suggest just waiting until you get to i21, because we may try and convert card history for an inactive card and find that that card's missing. So those are the types of reasons why it's better to convert too much information and deactivate or update it later than it is to convert too little and have errors. Miscellaneous information is also, if your customers are putting in miscellaneous keyboard, you can use this information to cross-reference whatever they typed in on the keyboard into something more beneficial as a description. We can track recurring purchase orders, dates and times of what that would be to attach to those transactions or invoices. And then we can also maintain a list of all of the vehicle cards within the system. And we can also accommodate vehicle cards tied to departments or regular cards, and then there is a setting of a priority if somebody were mixing both of them. The very first tab here, I want to touch base on part of this information, and part of it I'll come back to in future training discussions. But as we look at the account information in the setup, we'll want to note that, additionally, we can have different terms for card fueling than different lines of businesses. So that's why you see the terms codes twice here, once on the account screen as a primary and once for a card lock specific terms. We can also control discount schedules. So if people are doing monthly or weekly volume discounts or no discounts, we can set that up accordingly, as well as the fee profile is a recurring schedule as well. So one of the things that we'll see as we're working with the software is more consistency in pointing to profiles and using profiles as a means of setting up variations and setup, and less customer specific overrides versus linking to a profile. So an example of the discount schedules is in auto fueling, you could override the discount schedule with different rates by customer. And in i21, if you want to override the default discount schedule, we just want you to create a new discount schedule. And you could still have a customer specific discount schedule, but link them to their unique discount schedule, as opposed to trying to maintain or know who has so many different discounts. As we look down through some of the additional fields here, anything that you see with a red asterisk is a required field. And that'll be something that, if we need a default salesperson on their account, we can track that, or do some commission reporting as needed. And then this next section at the bottom here is network account cross-reference. That's going to be optional, but that may be something that as we are updating information for you, and actually being able to import in files, cards from the network to add new cards. If your account number on the network did not match the account number that was in auto fueling, then that's going to present a challenge that we may need to cross-reference those account numbers. The next two tabs or sections on the right-hand side, I'm going to talk about in much more detail in following sessions, related to pricing and related to invoice, sending out the monthly or weekly or invoicing. But just as a specific general discussion for now, the pricing on this screen links profile for different types of transactions. So you can have different pricing markup for remote transactions that are within the network, or local transactions at your site, or retail transactions are also known as extended remotes on the extended Fuelman network. So this is where you tie pricing to a specific customer, and again, we'll get much deeper into the price profiles and as we're processing transaction and showing how to audit the pricing in our next week's session. And then invoice formatting is another concept where we've got a lot of flexibility in the invoice format and how it sorts and groups and totals for the customers. So if you've got some customers that want department level tracking and others want to have a two-card system, you can actually set all of these parameters in a way that uniquely meets the needs of each specific customer. So you can see we're specific to the customer city of Fort Wayne, and they have a single card system, or they could sort it by a vehicle card, etc. And this invoice formatting, I'll show more examples in the next sessions for that, of how these checkboxes and field parameters actually look on the printed invoice, and that'll help tie that together a little bit better. Any questions on the tabs related to the card fueling module setup that's customer specific? I see
one question from Erica in the chat was, she was asking about this network account cross-reference. So if your account number, well, let's say you've got a customer, this one is customer 1005036. If that is the same number that's on the packpride.net account number, you don't need to maintain anything. But if that number were to be different, for example, like this number is probably outside of the size of account number range that is supported by packpride, then you would actually put in a value here and could tie this to a specific account number. Any other questions for this screen or set of screens we've been reviewing? Okay, I'm going to back out of the customer-related setup. I'm going to talk briefly about the network-related setup. And so that is under the card fueling menu. And the rest of that information, so as we access that from the sales customer screen initially, on the card fueling menu, you can also get to there directly from this card accounts listing. And so this will also give you a global list of all of your customers and seeing what discount schedules they are, what invoice cycle they belong to, profiles for pricing, etc., as well as seeing a global card list or a global vehicle list. So any one of these tabs can give you full reports of cards and information, as well as the ability to drill down into which account does that card belong to. Maybe somebody turns in a lost card and you don't know who it belonged to. You'd be able to search the global card report to identify that and either contact them to here's the card or deactivate and reissue. In addition to the customer setup on the card fueling, there is also quite a bit of network related settings available. And this information typically changes almost never, other than maybe some new products. If somebody goes to a retail site, you didn't have all the items in the network set up. But this is where you're going to be able to get to setting up some of those reusable profiles for customers for prices, discount schedules, fees, as well as all the network settings. And just to briefly go in and review the network settings, I do want to talk a little bit about this, but we don't need to go too in depth, as this is something that I don't believe customers will be using it that often because of how infrequently it changes, and it's typically going to be a call to a support team member for a question or clarification, or maybe guided through setting up and adjusting some of those items. So as we're looking at some of these fields, we're going to be automatically importing in all the sites as you process transactions. So this will populate on demand, though there may be some of your sites during the initial setup that we do set up uniquely. Specifically, if we're looking for any site groups for transactions for pricing out regions was the equivalent terminology in auto fueling. So if you had different deviations in some regions versus others, that's where the site group comes into play for that. Or if you've got a captive site that needs to be handled differently, we're also can flag that location as captive. Other key attributes we're looking at is a tax code cross-reference. This is something with the network that we can cross-reference all the taxes. So today with auto fueling, as you're importing in files, the taxes are part of the files and it's automatically imported and you don't have to maintain them very often unless it's something you're overriding. And we're doing a similar process in i21 where we take all the taxes from the import file and we will utilize those taxes unless you choose to override the taxes or what's part of the pricing at that particular site. But usually that's very rare that you would override them versus just using the network. So I do not anticipate, again, you'll be changing many of these things, but they're more informational that, how we map out federal excise tax, or probably the most common reason why you'd ever come in here has to do with items. So if you knew that, product 42 on the network was your gasoline product, you can actually set up and adjust any of these for those miscellaneous product codes that come in from time to time. And I think of the other tabs, they're going to be minimally of importance, other than, you may get errors on importing that says a product doesn't exist or a tax doesn't exist. And it's typically going to be related to some of these settings. If somebody went to an area where, they've got different taxing or different item codes that wasn't globally cross-referenced, then you would get some of those types of errors. Otherwise, as we look at some of the other options here for discount schedules, you can see in, these thresholds of if they buy over a certain volume, you can have a tier for the different discount rate that you would get. Again, very similar concept to what you would get in the auto fueling solution. And the discount schedules do convert in automatically as well. And is it for the other area here for fee profiles, this is the equivalent of the recurring charges in auto fueling. And so we can actually do transaction fees or statement fees or any combination of fees. And there can be one or more types of fees attached to a profile. And each one of those fees can be defined and maintained of how they're going to update the system, how they're calculated. Maybe it's a flat fee once a billing cycle. Could be a flat fee once a year. You could also calculate fees on, certain types of transactions, or, if they're adding cards, if you're trying to pass on some of the card fees that come from the network, you can use the recurring fees and fee profiles to meet those needs as well. And again, this is, throughout the transition from auto fueling, we'll be working with you to mimic and convert as much of the setup out of the system as possible. So if you're using recurring charges in auto fueling, then we'll have more detailed discussions with you on how you're using them and making sure they're set up and converted properly versus, our session today is meant to be more general, understanding of the topics, what's available, and then knowing that, I guess one other key part of it I should mention at the beginning was this session is meant to introduce the topics to you, but it's not meant to only have your training or your questions answered in these particular sessions. So we'll be, as we work with customers and, you get into the process of access and questions and training, reach out, and if we need to do some one-on-ones to clarify specific complexities of your business that may be different than what we're covering in the general training sessions, don't hesitate to ask for help on those things as needed. Any questions for what we've covered so far related to just the high level account setup, customer setup information? So if there's no specific questions, we can look at getting access for your accounts and letting you get logged in today. And then if more questions come up related to account setups, We will next week be going on to the next topic of importing transactions, auditing them, and all the scenarios of pricing. So that one is a good chance that one may not finish early on the training scenarios, but it's always good when a meeting goes early, right?